Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with the Haydn Symphony Crusade. And we're up to number 75 in D major. Another symphony that nobody cares about and that never gets played, but really ought to. Of course, they all really ought to, but if we did that, we wouldn't have time for anything else, would we? So that's, it's our loss. Anyway, number 75 is a large scale-ish kind of work. It's written for a big orchestra with, flute, bassoon, two oboes, two horns, trumpets, and timpani. Now, the trumpets and timpani were added later, and some people like to not do that because they figure, he really didn't want it, and that's not the way he originally wrote it, and that's all crap. You should always do everything that he added, especially if it involves trumpets and drums or making the orchestra larger or enriching the orchestration, because not only does that suit the character of the music, as often as not, probably better, but it's also a tool that Haydn uses timbrally to unify his works. And if you have trumpets and drums in three movements, then you automatically have a way to make the symphony sound more cohesive, because those are the instruments that you are heard frequently in a recurring basis, that are unusual, they're interesting, they're different, they're not the same old. So when you hear trumpets and drums in movement 1, 3, and 4, you automatically know that you have a conception that includes those things. And it's important with Haydn because he's operating, as I said before, with very limited means and sometimes on a very small scale. But he's extremely concerned, as I've taken pains to emphasize throughout this crusade, with unity, with telling you that this symphony is a totally coherent organism. And there are many ways that he does it. And timbre is one of them. And he does other things with timbre in this symphony that you'll hear as well. One of the really cool things about this symphony is that it has a slow introduction. Slow introductions at this period in Haydn are still rare. They happen, but not frequently. And when they do happen, usually there's some interesting reason for them. And so I'm going to play you the slow introduction, and we'll talk about what it is, and then we'll see how Haydn uses that as a means of creating some very interesting long-term emotional, expressive, and formal strategies. It's really, really cool. Take my word for it. So here is the introduction. We've got on Naxos, the Cologne Chamber Orchestra under Helmut Müller-Brühl. He's a nice guy, by the way. We gave him an award at the Cannes Classical Awards way back when, and he showed up to pick it up, and he was a very pleasant gentleman. Anyway, here you go. So it's a short introduction, but it's marked grave, which is very, very slow. And it's quite serious, isn't it? It does something kind of unusual. And that is, it begins in a major key, and then it just repeats basically the same stuff, but in a minor key, sounding very stern, and with the entry of the trumpets and timpani at the minor key part, which gives it extra drama So it goes from light to dark. Now, the whole symphony isn't going to end in darkness, but that's a progression, and it's a special one. And Haydn wants you to remember it. And we'll find out why momentarily. You might also note that the very end of the introduction had this little tiny three-note figure, dum ba bum 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 bum, like that, da da da. It's a little three-note thing. That little three-note thing is going to pop up, now and again within the symphony in some of its thematic material. I'm not going to make an issue of it here. You'll hear it when you hear the whole symphony. But the very opening theme of the allegro, da 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 da, there it is, ya da da, that thing. It's one of the little motives that Haydn's going to toy with to unify things, but he doesn't make a meal of it. He doesn't want us to pay special attention to it. What's much more important is the large-scale progression of a big hunk of material in a major key, leading to a darker, more emotionally pathetic, as in full of pathos, version of the same material in a minor key. That you're going to hear. You're really going to hear it. And when the first movement gets going, you will find that that is Haydn's long-term strategy, because the entire exposition is rather jolly and zippy in a major key, and the entire development section, which is considerably longer, is in a minor key. And so what we've heard in the introduction has established a pattern that's going to be echoed on a larger and larger scale as the work proceeds. And so I'm going to play you the entire first movement now without repeats, so that you can hear what Haydn does. It's really, really, really gripping. And I have to say, again, for those who feel that these Haydn middle symphonies are lacking emotional depth or intensity, listen to this development section. I mean, it's serious business. I mean, it's emotionally challenging music. It really is. And the second subject of this movement, which I'm going to play, let me just play you the second subject. It's very short. It's a throwaway second subject. It just goes beat it, beat it, beat it, beat it, beat it, little two notes, hoo-doo, doo-doo, doo-doo, like that. Well, here, listen to it. That little second subject vanishes entirely from the recapitulation. It's used in the development section. It winds up the development section, actually. You will hear it in a very light, fluffy, sort of throwaway second subject, but it becomes something terribly serious in the development section. And then once the recapitulation begins, Haydn just keeps on developing. He just keeps on developing the opening theme. Ya da 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 da, ya da 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 dum bum bum. Haydn was not. You have to remember something about Haydn and form. Haydn was inventing the forms that later became standardized, or we could say ossified, later on in the 19th century. Haydn didn't know anything about those. He didn't care. He was just trying to write great music, and so, as often as not, Haydn's recapitulations are very irregular. They're not normal, standard, balanced things. The balance comes in at the very end, usually in a coda or some sort of extended passage where the home key, the stability of the initial tonal area is reasserted. But usually he waits as long as possible to do that because he wants to keep you guessing. And he does with this. I mean, there might as well not even be a formal recapitulation. It should be like exposition and then development, ending, because it just keeps on going. And that's what's so cool about Haydn. He doesn't like to repeat himself. He likes to really get the most possible out of his material. And so once he's exhausted what he thinks is that little tiny second subject in the development, he just says, screw it. And he goes on and keeps on developing the first theme right up to the end of the movement. And the other thing I'd like you to pay attention to when we get to the very end is the very end. Because, remember how all of these symphonies, from this period by everybody, not just Haydn, once he's reasserted his home key, he doesn't really feel a need to make a big deal out of the final chords. It's it's almost the same usually as the end of the exposition. It's just two chords, maybe 3. Not here. Here he's starting to realize that he can build up so much energy that he needs a little extra pressure on the brakes. So this ending has like 4 or 5 chords. It's yum bum 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 like that. It's he's starting to appreciate how to dramatize everything. Not just the development sections, not just the middle, not just the approach to the recapitulation. There are moments when you can add rhetorical emphasis. And Haydn started to really understand the emphasis that he could put at the very, very end, to really ram home the message, as it were. So, okay, you ready? I mean, that's a lot to talk about, I understand. But I just want you to sit back and enjoy the next 3 or so minutes of music, because it really is a wonderfully rich, expressively rich passage of, chunk of Haydn-esque rhetoric, this movement is. It really is. So, here we go. Splendid, isn't it? Doesn't it develop just an incredibly powerful momentum? And that big central development section, it's really probing and pensive. I love that word, pensive. It creates tension and mystery and pathos and all of those things. And it's all in there. It really is. Now, the second movement is also, I think, a special Haydnesque kind of thing. It's a theme and variations. Haydn wrote lots of theme and variations in his slow movement, themes and variations. But remember in the previous symphony, number 74, the variations were all bound together. There was a steady flow from one to the other. Here, it's just the opposite. The theme, which sounds a little bit like God Save the King, by the way, that may have been intentional. Haydn did use it later on in Symphony number 98, so you never know. But it's full of pauses. And the variations are formally marked off from one another. Each one is an independent entity. He doesn't try to join them up. So at this slow tempo, with this hesitating gait that he gives the music, it creates an effect of stasis. And some people might say, oh gosh, it's just boring because it has all these pauses and things. I get it. I understand it. It's a special mood that Haydn was really a master of, this feeling of timelessness, everything standing still, even though some of these variations are actually kind of loud. There's one with fanfares, and there's a lot of contrast in the movement. There really is, because he doesn't want you to be bored. He doesn't want you to fall asleep. Each variation has plenty of character within itself, but from one to the next, there is this deliberate sense that we're not in a rush, because it's not a long movement. It's 5, 6, 7 minutes. That's it. We're not in a rush, and we're going to just stop and enjoy this almost trance-like state that Haydn creates. It's really, really very special. There aren't any other composers of that period, I think, who do anything remotely similar. And it wasn't really until late Beethoven that we began to get the same sort of sense of that hypnotic treatment of time, this handling of the movement of time. So anyway, I'm going to play you the entire first theme without its repeats, because these are formal variations. That is, they come in two halves, both repeated. And then I insert a little pause, and I want you to play you a little bit of one of the later variations. I think it's the third variation, which has 2 solo violins, solo cello, and pizzicato plucked strings for most of its length. And the reason I want you to hear that is because one of the reasons that the theme has all these pauses, all these breaks, is because Haydn can fill up the pauses in the variations. It's one way to increase the interest as he goes. And this is one of those variations where the cello has a constant running commentary while the regular tune with the pauses is on top. So you've got a continuity throughout the variation where we didn't have it before. The other thing I need you to keep in mind is the use of solo instruments, the 2 solo violins and solo cello. That is going to matter in a moment. But for now, let's listen to the opening theme of the slow movement, the beautiful subject of the variations, and then the beginning of the solo string variation with the 2 violins and solo cello. Here they are. It's lovely, isn't it? It's really, really beautiful. But I think hopefully you just got a sense of that wonderful stillness. It's a beautiful thing. It really is. And once you understand what Haydn's doing, I think you can come to appreciate, that wonderful, transcendental, spiritual, just Zen-like quality that Haydn is able to evoke. Now, the reason I wanted you to hear the solo string variation is because that is another timbral cue that Haydn uses. Just as he uses trumpets and drums in the first, third, and fourth movements, both the second and the minuet feature solos. In the case of the minuet, the solo is in the trio, the middle section of the minuet, and it's a solo violin, like we had solo violins in the slow movement, and a solo flute, doing the trio with other strings, doing accompaniment things underneath. So I'm going to play the whole trio section. We don't have to hear the minuet. It's a lovely minuet, by the way. It really is. And it uses that little three-note tchotchke I mentioned, that sort of ya-da-dum. Well, this does the opposite of that. This does instead of ya-da-dum, this one goes da-da-da-da-dum, da-da-dum. It reverses the accent of the rhythm. Da-da-da-dum, ba-ba-ba-dum. That's the minuet. And if you know that, then you know the minuet. But here is the trio section with its solo violin and solo flute. So without quoting themes or doing anything, motivic, Haydn is able to create a feeling of unity between these two movements. And it's really just lovely, lovely stuff. Now, the finale. You will recall that in the first movement, we had a large-scale format of major going to minor. And Haydn did that in two ways. First, in the introduction, to give it to us as a summary, sort of précis of what he's going to do, and then on a very large scale in the first movement. Now, the finale is a rondo. A rondo has the form A, B, A, C, A, normally in the classical period, and this one has that form. It's a bit of a variation rondo because the return to the opening theme, which is called a ritornello, because it returns, is varied when it comes back, but you know what it is, and it's not an issue. But here, what Haydn does recalls what happens in the first movement. All the statements of the rondo theme, the A theme, are in the major key, but the two big episodes, and there are two of them now, are in minor keys. So it's major, minor, and then major. It ends happily happily ever after. It has its happy conclusion. But, it's still, actually, it's very interesting. The conclusion is not, it doesn't race to the very end the way the first movement did. It because maybe the minor key shadows over it, it's a little bit more thoughtful, let's just say. I mean, it's a very satisfying ending. It really is. When it finally hits, you're like, oh, yeah, that sounds really good. And it makes perfect sense where it is, but you get a feeling, there's a feeling of, I don't know how else to describe it, as emotional completeness about this particular movement. It sums up, as Haydn's finales so often do, the entire expressive content of the symphony, but it does it in a formally light and engaging way. So, I mean, it's almost paradoxical, because it's only a 3-minute long movement, basically, but it does a lot. And it carries a much bigger expressive punch than its length would warrant. So now what we're going to do is we're going to hear the opening A section and the first episode leading back to the A section. So you just get a sense of this major key, minor key, topic or topos that Haydn has adopted to characterize the outer movements, particularly of this symphony. And it's very, very effective. And it just has a, I don't know, a feeling, like I said, of completeness. It makes you glad to be alive. It really does. So here it is. A beautiful and thoughtful symphony. This number 75 is. It deserves to get a little more, well, maybe a lot more attention than it ever does. Like I always say, for all of these talks, for all of these symphonies that nobody pays attention to, because we're really coming up now. I mean, we're hitting 1780, 1781, somewhere in there. Haydn's really coming up to his maturity and the maturity of the classical style in general. I mean, this is when Mozart's first masterpieces are going to start appearing, and Haydn is going to on the verge of writing his Paris symphonies, and the Opus 33 string quartets, which he claimed were composed in a completely new manner, a special way, where his mature language, what we call his mature language, it's an unfortunate term because his previous language wasn't immature at all, but it's evolving into something which is going to become not just Haydn and Esterhazy, but the style of the era. And we're seeing it take shape. And this is one of those works where I really believe that we do see it starting to take shape in the slow introduction, in the grasp of large-scale contrast, not just working with small motives or, sharing little things between movements, but by creating big forms that involve grand contrasts, major to minor in different ways, things like that. I mean, all kinds of nifty stuff is going to start happening in these symphonies, and we're really on the cusp of something exciting. So thank you for joining me on this crusade. Stick with it. We're getting there, and keep on listening. Take care.